Welcome to Uebele Art. I'm Jana Uebele, and I make weekly videos for creative people to inspire and share everything there is to love about art. This week, I'm working with my friend April over at Monkeymintaka, where we're creating a series of mini masterpieces based off of the work of other accomplished artists, where we look at their histories and some of their notable pieces and recreate a painting on a mini canvas. They're adorable and fun, and I hope you'll learn a lot. Let's jump in. This month, I've decided to profile Jasper Johns, who's a contemporary artist that I love. I chose this photograph of him from his mid-career time period, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about who he is. Jasper Johns was born in 1930 and was raised in the southern United States. He knew that he wanted to be an artist from a very young age, despite having not been exposed to much art. He equated art with his escape from the small-town life that he had experienced. He moved to New York in the early 1950s, and shortly after, developed what would be a long-term relationship with Robert Rauschenberg. It was when Rauschenberg's agent saw John's work that he acquired his first solo show. At this show, the first director of the Museum of Modern Art bought 4 of his works for the museum and solidified his place in the contemporary art world. Johns found a lot of inspiration from the work of Michael Duchamp after Rauschenberg took him to a retrospective of the notorious artist's work. Duchamp is well known for starting the Dada movement in the early 20th century. With World War I as the backdrop, Dadaism sought to express the meaninglessness of the current world. It rebelled against the notion of traditional art and often used real objects in conceptual ways. Johns came onto the art scene after abstract expressionism had had its day. He took his spin on Dadaism and expressionism by rendering common objects in new and interesting ways. Its meaning was often conceptual, but his methods leaned on the traditional. He was awarded the grand prize for painting at the Venice Biennale, one of the world's most important contemporary art exhibitions. In 1990, Congress awarded him the National Medal of Arts, and in 2011, President Obama granted him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, making him the first visual artist to receive the honor since 1977. Jasper Johns still works today, although he keeps a lower profile now that he's approaching 89. He will continue giving to the world long after his death, both by the power of his works and the gift of his Connecticut home and studio for artists to use as a working retreat. I love his work personally because of his use of rich and vibrant colors. To see these pieces in person is so completely different from anything that you can find in a picture online or in a book. There's like a living quality to this color and these textures and the layers that he puts in, and oftentimes they seem larger than life when you're standing in front of them. I remember being a little girl and loving art and going on a school field trip to the Art Institute of Chicago to see a retrospective of Georgia O'Keeffe's work. And I had been studying her work in books prior to this field trip. And I think I cried when I stood in front of, there was a painting of a tree that was just stunning in person. I can't explain it. It really is like they're alive when you look at the pigments and the brush strokes and the layering. The color just is vibrant in a way you can't capture in print or on a digital screen. So I highly encourage, if you can, to go to a museum and see some of his work for yourself with your own eyes and look at how he makes these simple objects breathe. I don't know how else to say it, especially his encaustic works. The wax gives a lusciousness, like a rich primordial sense of vibrancy. It's fantastic. So I tried to employ some of those types of techniques in this colored pencil drawing of Jasper Johns. I love to use colored pencils with their own almost waxy sense of pigment delivery and blending and layering these colors to create this portrait. Adding the watercolor to the background on top of the colored pencil really helped to bind it all together and make it pop, which I love. With the portrait now complete, I move on to filling in his career timeline and other examples of his work. I selected this terrific quote that reads, "Art is much less important than life, but what a poor life without it." I feel the same way myself. Art is one of the most enduring forms of history we have. You learn so much about culture, the pulse of a generation, and events through art. This includes music, dance, and the art movements that react visually and conceptually to the impact history has on us. We know so much about our faraway ancestors because of the artifacts they left behind. So look to our contemporary artists to reflect on what is happening now for the future to interpret. This work, Scent, is a lithograph of a prior encaustic and oil painting. Johns often repeats themes and imagery from one medium to another. These crosshatch marks show up in a lot of his works, and he has stated that he was inspired by some marks he once saw on a car. Both flag and thermometer draw from his neo-Dada inclinations using everyday objects. Thermometer is an oil painting encasing an actual working thermometer in the center. And it goes from the top of the piece all the way to the bottom and is very cool to see in person. I decided to recreate this piece in acrylic paint because I didn't think I could capture the vibrancy of this piece with any other medium. There were a whole lot of layers in what I ended up achieving here, and I probably could have gone on another hour or two building more and more layers to get closer and closer to his work, but decided to call it a day and move on to the bigger project at hand. Flag is an encaustic painting. Encaustics are a blend of wax, resin, and pigment. Johns wasn't specifically trained in the medium, but decided to use it after his painting didn't have the depth he was aiming for. When choosing the piece I wanted to replicate for my mini canvas, I hadn't realized it was one of his encaustic works. I've never worked with encaustics myself, but I'd already fallen in love with my selection. With some enabling from my husband, I decided to go ahead and take that first leap with wax, much like Johns did, all in service to the art. And let me tell you, caustics are crazy expensive, so I am looking forward to using the supplies that I purchased for this project in many upcoming works. And I had so much fun. I think that may be a part of my future. So I selected Target with Four Faces, which was done in 1955. So it's relatively early in Jasper Johns' career. I decided to start with this black gesso because when I look at the work, you can kind of see through the wax to these darker elements underneath, and I wanted to be able to bring that out. The canvas itself is 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches, so it really is very tiny. And I knew I was going to have to manipulate it to get these faces inside, and I took out the whole mother of invention part of me to make this work. And I have to tell you, it was very invigorating and a lot of fun. So I picked up these Stretch Armstrong mini dolls from Target, and I was really surprised when I found them because I think the faces of them especially, are very similar to what you end up seeing in John's original piece. And they were just the right size. I mean, what are the odds that I would find something like that? I originally thought that I was going to be able to use like some of those mini Barbie type figures, but they all had such exaggerated features, so I was very excited to find these dolls. And chopping heads off, while macabre and a little freaky, was also very fun. So I've had this Dremel for a while, and I think I've only ever used it for art projects. I did wear safety glasses to make sure that any little flying bits did not end up in my eyes. And especially with the dolls, the little plastic shavings went everywhere. It was in my hair. It was on my clothes. It's still all over the art desk. I kept reworking on the canvas. I needed to get the frame of the canvas itself to fit the heads inside, and I needed to make the heads similar enough to what was in John's final piece, and I just kept having to cut them down because really you can only see the nose and down to the chin, and in one of them I didn't cut enough. I was very fortunate to still have this melting pot device that I had gotten, probably almost 20 years ago. And I wasn't going to go out and buy a heating palette, I think it's called. I guess that's what's traditionally used with encaustics. So I was very lucky to have held on to this all of these years, going back to that whole hoarder notion that someday something might be useful again. So you can see that these blocks, those are the encaustics, which is that mix of wax and resin and pigment, and I just pressed them right onto my heating plate there, and then dabbed into it with a paintbrush. Usually I picked the oldest, nastiest paintbrushes that I had, and they needed to be natural bristles because if you use synthetics, the bristles themselves will melt along with the wax. So it was important to not only layer, but also to texture. I could have made this all very smooth, but in John's piece, it's not. Also, I found about midway through my process that if you look really closely at his original work, you can see that there's newsprint underneath the wax. And so early on I decided to go ahead and cut up I had some vintage book pages, and I cut those up and put them underneath. And my real challenge was making sure that the words showed through without losing the yellow color, and not quite as effective as I was hoping for, and I have no idea how he managed to pull it off himself. I then went over the faces and the wood that I had carved out above it to resemble the plaster faces that he had, and that almost terracotta look to all of it. While it's not an exact replica, I think I did a pretty good job of getting as close as I could with the materials I had at hand, and having it in this teeny tiny size is so much fun. I love having it in my home, and I'm kind of looking forward to after a whole year of these mini masterpieces, having a collection to hang on my wall that will look really cool and showcase all of these artists that I love and I'm now learning even more about because I'm sharing them with you. Thank you so much for watching. I just love art, and it's going to be great to explore some of the unknown histories of the world's greatest artists with you. Be sure to check out April's channel over at Monkeymintaka. She's already done 2 of these videos on Gustav Klimt and Mark Rothko, who are both great in their own rights. I hope you'll continue to join me as we explore these mini masterpieces each month, both on my channel and on April's.